Modern culture uses the word creativity as a catch-all term for everything from a corporate brainstorming session to a marketing deck. It is a word so overextended that it has lost its descriptive power. Psychologists still lack a single definitive consensus because we often conflate three distinct categories: the output, the cognitive tool, and the person. To navigate this, the Russian tradition divides the phenomenon into three pillars. First, the psychometric trait, the individual's underlying cognitive baseline. Second is creative thinking, the active cognitive instrument you deploy. Third is the overarching activity itself, the actual process of creation. Treating the trait, tool, and activity as separate, interdependent mechanisms is the necessary starting point. It allows us to move past the idea of creativity as a single mystery and begin examining its component parts. Psychologists traditionally define creative activity in two ways: by the objective newness of the final product, or by the nature of the internal process. Researcher A.I. Savinkov points out a flaw in product-based definitions. Measuring whether a result is historically new to the world is an external, historical metric. It tells us very little about the internal human psyche. When we focus on the process instead, we see that true creative activity is self-sufficient. It is motivated by the internal pleasure of the process, rather than a specific external target. In this model, the novel product is an accidental byproduct. The act of creation doesn't target a result, it yields one as a side effect of the activity itself. This differs from non-creative processes, which prioritize reaching predefined targets. In those cases, any byproduct is an inefficiency to be removed, rather than a discovery to explore. If the product is just a side effect, we must look elsewhere to understand how breakthroughs happen. We have to look exclusively at the internal cognitive engine. This search for the engine brings us to a common misconception in cognitive science: the idea that creative thought is synonymous with divergent thinking. J.P. Guilford's classic model distinguishes between convergent thinking, which narrows down to a single correct answer, and divergent thinking, which generates multiple alternative ideas from a single starting point. Divergent thinking is merely a property of thought. It provides variance and parallel processing, but it lacks the structural components to reach a finished solution on its own. N.I. Chernetskaya argues that treating divergence as the whole system ignores the essential roles of logic, synthesis, and the creator's personality. Generating 100 random ideas during a brainstorming session is useless if the mind lacks the structural capacity to synthesize those fragments into a single, robust solution. Divergent thinking acts as the fuel injector. It provides the raw, unlinked material for a much larger, more sophisticated machine. If divergent thought only provides the raw materials, the actual synthesis must happen elsewhere, outside of conscious control. Sigmund Freud viewed creativity as a form of sublimation. In his view, the unconscious mind acts as a hidden reservoir of raw drives and repressed material that fuels the creative act beneath our awareness. Carl Jung's expansion of this idea suggested that creativity taps into a collective unconscious, utilizing universal archetypes that exist far beyond personal experience. Gestalt psychology describes the mechanism of this synthesis. The unconscious mind pulls fragmented facts together until they suddenly snap into a unified configuration. Modern cognitive science confirms that this high-speed data recombination happens in the dark. Your consciousness only receives the finished, assembled result. Conscious brainstorming has inherent limits. True synthesis requires the high-speed, invisible processing of the unconscious mind. We can track this interaction through a formal 4-stage cognitive pipeline. Stage 1 is the conscious analytical capacity. This is where you deliberately isolate, define, and logically dissect the problem. Stage 2 takes place in the unconscious. Imagination and intuition operate at high speeds, recombining divergent elements out of sight. Stage 3 is the insight. The fully formed solution breaches the threshold and drops back into conscious awareness. Stage 4 is secondary conscious analysis. Logical thought returns to dissect, verify, and apply the concept to reality. The timing of the third stage varies by domain. A physicist might experience a sudden flash of clarity, while an artist might experience a prolonged state of inspiration. Creative thinking is a rigorous feedback loop that alternates between cold logic and unconscious chaos. But the cognitive pipeline alone isn't enough. A person can have the creative trait and the right tools and still fail to produce a breakthrough. The system needs an engine. Diana Bogoyevlensky identifies this engine as intellectual activity. She argues that intellect must be driven by a specific motivational structure to become creative. Most adaptive behavior stops the moment a problem is functionally solved. Intellectual initiative does the opposite. Intellectual initiative pushes thought processes beyond what the environment requires, delving into the theoretical core. Thinking at the stimulus productive level solves the immediate problem and stops. Thinking at the creative level exhausts the object of knowledge entirely to formulate new fundamental laws. True creativity is non-adaptive. It is the refusal to accept a functional, good enough solution in favor of an obsessive search for the underlying truth. We can assemble these components into a unified architecture. The foundation is the trait, combining intelligence with intellectual initiative. Above is the cognitive tool, the creative mechanism executing the analytical and unconscious loop. At the apex is the activity, an internally motivated process yielding novel products. Treating creativity as a mystical gift or a simple brainstorming trick keeps it entirely out of our control. By adopting this precise cognitive architecture, we stop waiting for inspiration and begin understanding the actual mechanics of human insight.